Hello guys, welcome to another edition of our videos on Benjamin's academic birthday. On our last class, we were talking about the scramble for Africa, and under that, we saw the reasons for the scramble, reasons for the list of the scramble, and today we'll be talking about the partition of Africa. But before going to the partition of Africa, we'll be talking about the Berlin West African Conference, which was held in 1884 to 1885. This conference was an international conference held in Berlin, Germany. And the aim of this conference was to bring discipline among the European states that were scrambling for Africa. This conference was actually summoned by Otto von Bismarck, who was the German Chancellor, and Jules Ferry, who was the French Prime Minister. The events of the Congo Basin actually provoked the holding of the Berlin West African Conference, and colonial rivals in Africa sparked out the holding of the Berlin West African Conference. Now we're going to look at some of the rivals, the colonial rivals in Africa, which led to the holding of the Berlin West African Conference. Firstly, we'll be talking about the British and the French clash over Egypt. British and French clashed over the African territory Egypt, and during this clash, France was defeated and Britain finally occupied Egypt, and this was in 1882. Again, we'll be talking about the Fashoda incident in 1898, and this was the incident between British and French over Sudan. Again, we'll be talking about Britain and Germany, who clashed over South Africa, Southwest Africa, that is Namibia. And Germany succeeded in the rivalry and prevented British in occupying Namibia. Again, we'll look on the British and the French clash in the Niger Delta. This rivalry actually ended with the favor of Britain, that is British actually occupied the Niger Delta. And lastly, we'll be looking about the France and Germany who quarreled over Morocco, leading to the Tangiers incident of 1905 and the Agadis crisis of 1911. Now we'll be talking about the scramble, which was also characterized by the summoning of conference, and some of the conference which was summoned as a result of the scramble was the Berlin West African Conference, which is our main core, and the Brussels Conference, which was held in 1890. Now let's look at the reasons for the holding of the conference. We first of all know that the main aim of this conference was to bring discipline among the European powers that were scrambling for Africa, as such preventing any major war provoking among these powers. Now we see that it was held to end hostilities among the European nations scrambling for Africa. This was to prevent any major war from arising, because the aim of this conference was to bring peace among them. Now, another reason was to ensure free trade and navigation in the interior of Africa, especially along the Congo and the Niger basins, because in Africa this was the most lucrative areas of trade, that is the Congo and the Niger. As such, this conference was held in order to ensure free trade and navigation. Next, it was also held to limit arbitrary and disorderly European expansion in Africa. Another reason for the holding of this conference was to guarantee freedom of European powers on the African coast, not yet under European colonial control. By this time, there were some African territories that were not yet under European control. We have countries like Sierra Leone and Liberia. These countries were not under European powers because the European powers considered this country not rich enough for them to occupy. As such, the conference was held in order for these states to have their personal freedom. Next, we have some European statesmen wanted to use the conference to consolidate their position in Africa. Bismarck, for example, saw the conference as a means for Germany to consolidate her position in Africa, for example in Togoland, and without bringing Germany to a clash with any other European nation that was interested in acquiring Togoland. The conference was also held in order to lay down guidelines that European powers would follow in order to acquire territories in Africa. And lastly, it was held because of the desire by some European humanitarians to eradicate slave trade, and which was an unprofitable business to the European powers. So they wanted to eradicate this trade, and it was also considered inhuman to the Africans. So they had the desire to eradicate this trade. Now we'll be looking at on the participants of the conference, we first of all know that this conference was summoned by Otto von Bismarck, who at this time was the German Chancellor, and Jules Ferry, who at this time was the French Prime Minister. During this time, they sent invitations to all European powers who were interested in acquiring territories in Africa. And such European powers were Germany, France, Britain, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, delegates from USA and other powers. We can see that the Berlin Conference was unfair because although the conference was to discuss about the fate of Africa, no African power was actually present in the conference. Now we'll talk about the resolutions or the decisions that were taken at the Berlin West African Conference. During this conference, there was a policy known as the policy of the principle of notification. This principle actually stated that any power that was interested in any state in Africa or any country in Africa should inform the other European powers that were also interested in acquiring that same state. Another one was the principle of effective occupation. This principle literally states that if a European power has been accepted to acquire a territory in Africa, they should notify other powers by, for instance, hosting their flags, setting up an administration in that African territory. Another resolution that was taken at the conference is that there should be freedom of trade and navigation among the Niger and the Congo basin. We first of all need to know that this was one of the reasons for the holding of this conference, and it was taken as a resolution which considers the Berlin West African Conference to be successful. Another resolution that was taken is that European powers that were occupying respective portions in the African coast should have free access into the interior, and this was known as the hinterland theory. King Leopold's claims over the Congo Free State was also recognized. Portugal's claim on the mouth of the River Congo, as well as British claims over Cameroon, was rejected. Now, another resolution that was taken is that traders, missionaries, and other European agents should have free access into the interior so as to completely eradicate slave trade and to provide Africans with European civilization. We know that the European missionaries were people that, with the aim of eradicating these inhuman practices in Africa. As such, the Berlin West African Conference gave them the upper hand to be able to go into the interior and eradicate such inhuman practices and introduce Christianity. Now we'll be looking about the effects or the impacts of the conference on Africa. We say that number one is by the ground rules or modalities of the scramble, it intensified the scramble for territories in Africa and hastened the partition of the African continent. This was due to the free navigation that was given to the African territories in order to navigate the interior. This now laid a favorable ground for the scramble for Africa. It resulted to the establishment of new system of administration in Africa due to the theory of effective occupation, which stated that if you are being accepted to acquire a territory, you should do well by hoisting a flag or opening up administrative districts in that area. It now led to the development of these administrative places in Africa. The third one, it confirmed King Leopold's claim over the Congo, making the Congo to become Leopold's personal property. That means Congo was now considered as a territory under King Leopold. Another effect that the scramble had on Africa is that it led to the peaceful partition of African continents, since some discipline and order was brought amongst the European states, and this was all thanks to the Berlin West African Conference. Another effect of this conference was that Africans were deprived of their right to decision. This was because no African state was present at the Berlin Conference, although the conference was actually held to decide on their fate. Next, we'll talk about the conference contributing to the fight for the abolition of slave trade and inhuman sacrifices. Okay guys, another effect of this conference is that the conference succeeded in bringing some peace among European nations, thus improving international relations among colonial powers in Europe. And lastly, the conference paved the way for the emergence of colonial boundaries in Africa. And these colonial boundaries were transformed during independence into modern African states. We have something like the Ashanti and all that. Okay, we're talking about the shortcomings of the conference. First, the conference participants failed to follow the decisions that were taken at the conference. That is the free trade and navigation on the Congo and the Niger rivers. King Leopold actually considered the Niger as his personal belonging, and with this, he restricted other European powers from navigating freely in the Niger, inasmuch as George Goldie prevented European powers from navigating in the Congo. Next shortcoming of the conference was that European nationals, contrary to the decision of the conference, did not have free access into the interior of Africa. This was because some European powers restricted others from getting into the interior, which they had already occupied. That is, European powers who had already occupied territories in Africa restricted other European powers from carrying out trade in their respective territories. Another shortcoming of this conference was that the European powers did not respect the principle of effective occupation. That is, they carry out their trade only along the coast and did not enter the interior because they were scared of contracting various diseases in the interior of Africa, and so they limited their activities only at the coast. And lastly, the conference was considered unfair because even though the conference was held to discuss the fate of the Africans, no African power was present at the conference. Now we want to look at the methods used by European countries to acquire territories in Africa. European powers used various methods to establish their control over the African states or kingdoms, and one of these would be by annexation. By the system of annexation, European powers signed treaties with African chiefs and kings, consolidating their leadership or control in their territories. For example, we have the German-Douala Treaty of Annexation signed in July 12, 1884. Next, we have by military conquest. European powers used military conquest to acquire colonies in Africa. This was common especially in those African states that resisted European control. The European powers therefore used their military conquest to frighten these African states to accept their control. For example, in 1899, Sudan became a British colony under military conquest. Next, we have by protectorate. With this protectorate, the European powers fooled the Africans that they are going to come in their territory in order to protect them from other European powers or from other strong African states. And with this, they now took advantage of this in order to occupy their territories. For example, we have the British protectorate over northern Nigeria. Next, by concession. By this method, Africans gave European charter companies the certain rights to carry out trade, to carry out socio-economic projects in their various territories, like the construction of roads and all that. The European powers now took this as an opportunity to now consolidate their rule in these African states. For example, we have the British Royal Niger Company, who received the Niger Delta areas as concession. Another way in which the European powers acquire territory in Africa is by negotiation. With this negotiation, the European powers negotiated with other European powers in order to acquire territories in Africa. For example, France obtained Morocco by negotiating with Germany in 1911. Again, we have by mandate. Through this system, African territories were seized by force. That is, European powers used force in order to seize territories in Africa. For example, we have Germany and Turkey lost territories in Africa during the First World War. And the League of Nations was a body which was created in order to share African states that were consolidated during the war. And then next we have by war between European powers. Some European powers gained territories in Africa by fighting wars with other European powers. For example, in Italy took over Libya by defeating Turkey in a war. And last, we have by gunboat diplomacy. By this policy, Europeans used big gunboats to frighten African powers, especially the weaker African states in order to consolidate their rule in these territories. For example, British used their gunboats to frighten the Sultan of Zanzibar to sign treaty of annexations with them. Again, we'll be talking about the European territories in possessions in Africa. That is the territories that the European powers possessed in Africa as a result of the scramble. Well, first we'll be looking at Germany and her colonies. Germany took over Cameroon, Togoland, South Africa, Tanganyika, Rwanda, and Burundi. We should take note that Germany was the biggest power that acquired many territories in Africa. But this was over during the First World War, because during this time all the German colonies were seized, and under the League of Nations, it was shared among the victorious powers during this war. Then we are going to another power was Portugal. Portugal took Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau. Now we have Spain. Spain had Equatorial Guinea, Spanish Morocco, Spanish Sahara, okay, I'll go back to Spain. Spain had Equatorial Guinea, Spanish Morocco, Spanish Sahara, presently known as the Western Sahara. And this territory, that's the Western Sahara, has been since 1975 at the center of the conflict between Morocco and the nationalist movement known as the Polisario Front or Western Sahara Liberation Front. Next we have Belgium. Belgium controlled the Belgian Congo, Burundi, Rwanda that were given to her after the First World War. Now Italy had Libya, Italian Somaliland, and Eritrea. Her attempts to bring Abyssinia under Italian control with failure in 1896 when the Abyssinians shamefully defeated them. Though they attacked and defeated Ethiopia in 1935, their occupation of this territory was temporary as Ethiopian independence was reinstated in 1941. Now we have British. Britain took over Egypt, Sudan, Kenya, the Gambia, Niger, the Gold Coast, Nyasaland, Botswana, Lesotho, Rhodesia, Sierra Leone, Switzerland, Zambia, and Zanzibar. Britain also received additional African territories after the First World War because Britain emerged as one of the successful powers after the First World War. As such, the territories that were seized from Germany were partitioned or were shared between British and the other powers that emerged victorious after the war. And then we'll talk about France. France had present-day Tunisia, Senegal, Gabon, Niger, Ivory Coast, Morocco, Ora Volta, Madagascar, Mauritania, Guinea, Conakry, Central Africa, Mali, Chad, Algeria, Congo, Brazzaville, Mauritius, and the Comoros Island, Benin, and Chad, Togo, and French. We should also note that Cameroon was handed to her after the First World War as a mandated territory. It should be noted as well that Southwest Africa was given to the Republic of South Africa as a mandated territory after the First World War. Now we're going to look at some questions here. Number one, we say, what do you understand by the scramble for Africa? Which factors provoked the scramble and what were its consequences? From our previous video, I'm sure after carefully watching and understanding what we actually said there, you are going to be able to answer this question with ease. The second question is discuss the circumstances that led to the summoning of the Berlin Conference in 1884 and 1885. Bring out the resolutions of this conference. Third, we have outlined and explained the methods used by Europeans to scramble for and partition Africa in the late 19th centuries. Number four, we have described the colonial possessions of Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, Italy, Belgium, Spain in Africa by 1900. And lastly, we have shown how the Berlin Conference contributed to the scramble for and partition for Africa in the late 19th century. These questions are actually past sample GCE questions, and after looking at our video and watching carefully, I believe you'll be able to answer these questions with ease, and we are assuring you a success in your exams. Hi guys, thank you so much for watching Benjamin's Academy by on YouTube and on Facebook, Benjamin's Academy. Don't forget to like, share, comment. For your comments will take us far and make us better. Thank you.